Welcome to a bonus Great Books lecture. This is our second time doing this to honor Shakespeare's birthday. As always, we want to thank marketing. We want to thank video services. We want to thank the CoLab for making this possible. Hello, I'm Michael Carragher. I'm in the English department along with Maureen Fitzpatrick. We are either responsible for this or we're to blame for this. So thank you for your attendance. Want to just thank Professor Werkmeister here and tell you a little bit about him as we get started. Steve is professor of English here at Johnson County Community College. He began teaching about 20 years ago at this point. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and Medieval Renaissance Studies from the University of Nebraska. He also completed his graduate work at Nebraska focused on Shakespeare and William Langland's Piers Plowman. Steve has taught a number of courses here at the college, all levels of composition, courses on Shakespeare, Latinx literature, world literature, and British literature. And his words, he says he sees himself as a bit of a utility player and part-time gadfly, though others have different terms for that role. Aside from teaching, Steve serves on several departments, division, and college-level committees. And Steve writes, he constantly reads, and I think he has some family here today. He spends some time with his family as well. So Steve's busy. And as we noted, this is our second go-round at a Shakespeare-focused lecture. Last year, Professor Werkmeister walked us through some thoughts on Julius Caesar. And you can find that presentation and all of our 9 years of lectures on the YouTube website. And we ask that you do that. Today's presentation covers Shakespeare's, I think I'm going to get this one right, because I think there's some discrepancy. Love's Labour's Lost.
Yeah.
It is the subject of the Heart of America Shakespeare Festival this summer in Kansas City. Friends, Steve Werkmeister.
Steve Werkmeister, English professor here at JCCC, going into my 20th year here, which should be long enough to justify a marching band, though I'm not really counting on it. I did this talk last year focused on Julius Caesar. Apparently no one listened to the end. As Tom Waits might say, that's the way your cookie crumbles. Afterwards, I heard from a few people that I speak too quickly. It's true, I do. I guess in my defense, people also say that if doing things like this makes you uncomfortable, imagine your audience naked. So you can see the quandary. Trying to deal with my anxiety, I ended up in a Turkish bathhouse of the mind. I'll try to do better, speak more deliberately, and keep my eyes on the script. No offense. Oh wait, I got a clicker, sorry. See, that's why I'm horrible at these. Shakespeare. So Shakespeare grew up in Stratford-upon-Avon, a town roughly 100 miles northwest of London. He was born in 1564, the 6th year of Elizabeth's reign, probably on the 23rd of April. Shakespeare was born then just over halfway through the long tumultuous Tudor period, where conviction, particularly religious conviction, was both demanded and dangerous. Okay. At this point, it's important to remember the Tudors had spent the previous 30 years trying to decide which flavor of Christianity they prefer. If your religion is the most important aspect of your life, and as an atheist, I'm not sure why anyone would bother if it wasn't. You're gambling your eternal soul on picking the right one. Every prayer is a promise. Every ritual a statement of belief. And if your choice differs from the monarch's choice, you could be burned at the stake. So consider real quick the religious history of Shakespeare's family lived through just in the 16th century. In 3 decades, England went from standard Catholic, then Protestant light under Henry, to hard Protestantism under Edward, to hard Catholicism under Mary, to Elizabeth's kinder, gentler Protestantism, and God only knows what's coming after her. It's a theological whiplash. Every promise you made to God is broken once a new Tudor takes the throne, and there's no evidence the God of Renaissance England is into broken promises. I imagine for some Elizabethans, then, it raised terrifying questions about language. How many times can you flip back and forth until you start to suspect that your words have no meaning? How many times can you pledge allegiance to one belief system, then another, then back again before you start to suspect pledging allegiance is merely performative. This is the point I'll circle back to, but I wanted to bring it out here since it seems embedded within the culture. In 1582, the 18-year-old Shakespeare marries the 26-year-old Anne Hathaway. Their daughter Susanna was born 6 months later. Nobody ever claimed she was a preemie, so we can all do the math. In 1585, the Shakespeares have twins, Hamnet and Judith, and William basically disappears from the record for the next 7 years. We've been there. Apparently, a preschool-aged daughter and infant twins can make it easier to leave home. And just a quick side note, okay, we probably don't want to read too much in Shakespeare leaving home. Leaving one's family to seek a living or fortune was common during the time period. Sailors and soldiers, merchants and explorers did it all the time. If you wanted to make movies in the 20th century, you went to Hollywood. If you want civil liberties in the 21st century, you go to Canada. If you wanted to be a writer and needed patronage in the 16th century England, you went to London. Okay. Again, we don't know exactly why he left or what the state of his family life was when he left, right? But we do know throughout his career he invested heavily into real estate and other ventures in Stratford-upon-Avon and later retired there to his wife and his family. So the speculation about the state of his marriage might be unfounded. And just a really late side note to my side note, this just came out yesterday. In the past few days, we've learned that a U of Bristol professor has found a letter fragment addressed to a Mrs. Shakespeare living in London with her husband. The fragment was actually in a book binding belonging to an acquaintance from Stratford. So there may be some evidence that Anne, at least for a time, was living with William in London, right? Moms need breaks too. We also, and we'll have to see how this shakes out once other scholars get a chance to look at it and stuff like that, consider the evidence. But it's kind of exciting, right? This, because we've always had this picture of him leaving her, right? And her just staying home and raising the kids. So it is kind of exciting to think that maybe she joined him at times. And also, again, that letter was addressed to her, which suggests that she was literate, right? She could read letters. So but like I said, we'll see how that goes. And before I get to the play proper, a warning and a confession. I once read a scene excerpted from a Seinfeld script, and I realized I wasn't laughing at the script. I was laughing at my memory of the performances. Looking at the page, I didn't see a lot of funny there. Okay. And it was much the same way with Merry Wives of Windsor, a Shakespearean comedy that to me feels completely dialed in, until I saw the Public Theater's 2021 production on PBS. I was shocked by how much fun they made the play seem. Right? It's not a fun play. What's funny on stage isn't always funny on the page. And as I always tell my students, I'll give you my reading, but make up your own minds. Which brings us to Love's Labour's Lost. Probably not a surprise. I've been telegraphing this for the last 10 minutes, but it's also not my favorite. If Titus Andronicus is Shakespeare's Tarantino play, Love's Labour's is this play about nothing. There's barely a plot. It's mostly a lot of people doing a lot of talking, which sure is most of Shakespeare. But in this case, the talking seems to be the point, not the vehicle. So in a sense, I'm kind of grateful for this chance to talk about the play, just kind of, since it has forced me to really think about it and dive in and see what I can find. But here's why I brought up Seinfeld and Merry Wives. I don't necessarily trust me either. Okay. Perhaps the best I can say about my judgment is that I'm open to being wrong, like I was about Merry Wives. And I'm really looking forward to what Heart of America does with Love's Labours, because I honestly hope they change my mind. Right. Until then, though, just lots of heavy sighs. Love's Labour's Lost was an early play, probably written about 1594, 1595. The first quarto version that we know of was published in 1598, but it also claims to have been, quote, newly corrected and augmented by W. Shakespeare, end quote, which suggests there was an earlier quarto that needed correcting. Right? So it next appears in the first folio, and then, of course, the subsequent folios, and a later quarto in 1631. It was heavily indebted to the playwright John Lilly, who is one of the most popular English playwrights in the generation before Shakespeare. He was really big in the 1580s. Lyly was to comedy as Marlowe was to tragedy. His style even got a name, euphuism, and it still shows up sometimes. You can catch a lot of it in the 1966 Batman, which was the best superhero movie ever. And at this point, sorry, hashtag mic drop. I did that for my kids. I'm not even sure what it means. But back to Lyly, if we can trust Wikipedia, and at this point we might as well, euphuism was an elegant literary style that employed frequent use of alliteration, antithesis, balance, and simile, and was briefly fashionable in the 1580s. On some level, Shakespeare would be stealing from Lyly his entire career. Here's a few examples of Lyly's writing. As the best wine doth make the sharpest vinegar, so the deepest love turneth to the deadliest hate. Right? Here I'm thinking he's answering a question. To have thy study full of books than thy purse full of money, is it not far better to abhor sins by the remembrance of others' faults than by repentance of thine own follies? Right? And then that last one, Polonius will echo this. Be valiant, but not too venturous. Let thy attire be comely, but not costly. Okay. And here's real quick a passage, which you guys probably can't see, from Love's Labor's Lost. I'd try to fit it on one slide. How this is between two kind of minor characters. How canst thou part sadness and melancholy, my tender juvenile? By a familiar demonstration of the working, my tough signor. Why tough signor? Why tough signor? Why tender juvenile? Why tender juvenile? I spoke it, tender juvenile, as a congruent epitheton appertaining to thy young days, which we may nominate tender, and I, tough signor, as an opportunate title to your old time, which we may name tough. And of course, Shakespeare's peers noticed the influence. They were stealing from Lyly too, right? Everybody's stealing from Lyly. In his poem to Shakespeare's memory, one of two he wrote for the first folio, the famously prickly Ben Jonson wrote how he should tell how far Shakespeare didst our Lyly outshine, or sporting kid, or Marlowe's mighty line. As Bloom said, first imitate the masters, then kill them. That's pretty much the law of all arts. Learn from what preceded you, then create something so great others forget others had come before. You see that all the way to Louis Armstrong overtaking Buddy Bolden and King Oliver 100 years ago. And you see that now with Andor overtaking the rest of Star Wars, making it feel paltry and contrived. There's a reason everyone in this country is within 100 miles of some Shakespeare festival, yet almost none of them are performing Lyly, Kid, or the Mighty Marlowe. Shakespeare killed them. Okay. Performance history. The first recorded performance of the play was at the court for Queen Elizabeth during the Christmas festivities of 1597. There was a second performance in 1605 for one of the nobles' houses. We're just not sure which. Apparently they didn't want to admit it. And then not another, this blew my mind, and then not another performance until 1839. Okay. In London, the Times was not impressed. Okay. So it wasn't just me, all right? In England, there would be only two more recorded performances over the course of the 19th century that we know of. For some reason, the play becomes more popular in the 20th century, which also roughly coincided with the introduction of lead paint. I'm not saying there's a connection. The prosecution would rest. We've got like 45 more minutes to fill. Synopsis. So the play begins with Ferdinand, the King of Lamar, along with his three stooges, Berowne, Longueville, and Dumaine, embarking on a rather stupid plan to retire from the world for 3 years and live the aesthetic life of a scholar. Not only are they barred from seeing women for those 3 years, they're to eat only one meal a day, 6 days a week, nothing on the seventh day, and sleep only 3 hours per night. Naps are expressly forbidden, which at my age seems like the worst of the restrictions. Despite Berowne's misgivings and the fact that the French princess is on her way for a diplomatic meeting, they all signed the pledge. At this point, a letter from Don Armado, a Spaniard with the affectations of a Renaissance E.B. Farnham, so you Deadwood fans know who I'm talking about, is brought in accusing the uneducated Costard of bumping nasties with the local milkmaid, Jacquinetta. Why snitch? In the next scene, Armado admits he's in love with Jacquinetta despite her low birth, and he writes her a long and ridiculous love letter despite the fact that she's illiterate, which must be love. In Act 2, the Princess of France arrives with 3 ladies in waiting, Rosaline, Maria, and Catherine, all of whom knew Navarre's study buddies from before. You don't need an abacus to do the math here. Boyette, the ladies' escort and apparently head negotiator for the diplomatic mission, informs the women that due to Navarre's vow, they're not allowed into the forest. They'll need to camp out they're not allowed into the palace. They need to camp out in the forest. Navarre and his companions show up, welcome the women to his outdoor space, and complains to have never received payment for Aquitaine. Apparently, his father had loaned money to her father, and Aquitaine was used as collateral. The rest of the paperwork is set to arrive the next day, so he says his goodbyes. Boyette insists the King of Navarre has fallen in love with the princess and suggests using it to their advantage. I'll give you Aquitaine and all that is his, and, which if, you give him, for my sake, one loving kiss. Okay. In Act 3, Armado gives Costard a letter he wants delivered to Jacquinetta and some money. Costard is delighted by the word remuneration. Berun comes in, also gives Costard a letter and money. His letter is for Rosaline. Berun ends Act 3 with a speech where he's astounded by the fact that he, a manly man, could be in love. Act 4, the women are getting ready to hunt deer when Costard shows up and confuses the letters. The women make fun of Armado's letter to Jacquinetta. Holofernes, the schoolmaster, and Sir Nathaniel, the curate, discuss language. Nathaniel has a boy crush on Holofernes and all his fancy talk. Constable Dole listens in and admits he has no idea what anybody's talking about. Jacquinetta comes in with the wrong letter, and the men are appalled by Berun's poor style. They are very, very judgy in this play. Later in Act 4, Berun spies on Navarre, who spies on Longueville, who spies on Dumaine, after which they come out from hiding, each taking turns accusing each other of being a hypocrite and an oath breaker. Berun comes up with the hair-splitting argument as to why they didn't break their oaths, even though they did. And they decide the best way forward is to disguise themselves as Russians and pay a visit to the ladies. I know. The very long Act 5 is actually over a third of the play, begins with the middle cast characters deciding to entertain their betters by presenting a pageant of the 9 worthies, even though there's only 5 of them. The women compare the gifts and bad poetry sent to them by their suitors and talk about what fools the men are. The smarter the person, the harder they fall. And here they all kind of take turns, but the princess says, none are so surely caught when they are catched as wit turned fool. Folly and wisdom hatched hath wisdom's warrant and the help of school, and wit's own grace to grace a learned fool. The women find out that the men are on their way disguised as Russians, so they put on masks and exchange gifts. That way the men woo the wrong women. They put up a show of resistance against the men, again, who are disguised as Russians. The men later figure out that the women had them figured out, and they had vowed eternal love to the wrong lady. They come back, tail between their legs. The lower class characters put on a pageant of the 9 worthies, but they don't get far, which is good because, again, there's only 5. The performance falls apart when it's discovered that Armado has impregnated Jacquinetta. The princess finds out that her father has died, so birth and death, and Navarre's reaction is to ask her to marry him. Seriously. Your dad's dead. Oh, good, let's get hitched. She takes charge, informs the court they'll be leaving immediately, and tells Navarre that they thought the men were just joking. She instructs Navarre to spend 1 year in a hermitage, fasting, praying, doing hermitage stuff. If after 1 year he still wants to marry her, he may come to her. The other women give similar stipulations to other men. Berun is to spend a year in the hospital cheering up dying patients, which I assume was the plot of Calling Dr. Sunshine. Berun is to use his humorous talents for good for the community. Armado vows to marry Jacquinetta. The lesser characters do a song and dance, and that's the end of the play. Or is it? ... We'll get back to that later. So, y'all know how much I hate to complain. Staying in my nature. But I've got problems with this play. And first, like, what's going on with the title? For one, we're sure what the actual title is. We're just not sure how to punctuate it. The 1598 quarto calls it Love's Labor's Lost, right? No apostrophes. The first folio, published in 1623, about 7 years after Shakespeare's death, has it the single apostrophe Love's Labor's Lost, right? As does the second folio in 1632. But the 1631 quarto reverts back to the no apostrophe Love's Labor's Lost. And it's not until the third folio, 1663, that we settle on the one on the bottom, 2 apostrophes, Love's Labor's Lost. And I know I'm getting all English professory with this, and granted, it took a long time for punctuation to become standardized, decades into centuries. But seriously, what's going on with the apostrophe S? Are they possessives or contractions? Or are they merely decorative? We've settled on, again, the 2 apostrophe Love's Labor's Lost, but does that mean love is labor's lost? Love's labor is lost? Love is labor is lost? It makes no sense, and it kind of drives me nuts. Oh, that's way small. Another question I have, why is Navarre such a tool? The men in Shakespeare's comedies, particularly the central lovers, tend to be consistently unimpressive. So we would joke about that. It's like, don't even bother learning their names in the comedies. They're all interchangeable. It's no surprise that Navarre comes across, at least in my mind, as an idiot. Female characters tend to ground the comedies, and women tend to take control of the action. The men just take the credit and control towards the end of the play after the heavy lifting's been done. Probably not a huge surprise when we remember that Shakespeare, as a teenager, married a woman 8 years his senior. And I'm not even going to mention the dynamics of our own English department. But Navarre, good God, y'all, look at his opening speech. Let fame that all hunt after in their lives live registered upon our brazen tombs, and then grace us in the disgrace of death, when, spite of cormorant devouring time, the endeavor of this present breath may buy that honor, which shall bait his scythe's keen edge and make us heirs of all eternity. Therefore, brave conquerors, for so you are that war against your own affections and the huge army of the world's desire, our late edict shall strongly stand in force. Navarre shall be the wonder of the world. Our court shall be a little academe, still and contemplative in living art. Still and contemplative, you're a king, right? You're not a Martha, right? I'm sorry, you're a Martha, you're not a Mary. You know, the Catholics will get that. You have a kingdom to run, right? Who's going to manage the people's affairs over the next 3 years while you're busy reading? Right? And why are you so worried about death? You still have a life to live. And why dress it up in martial terms? Brave conquerors, war, armic. Our edict shall strongly stand in force. Dude, you're conquering a bookshelf, not a continent. Right? By contrast, look at what the princess says about fame before she goes and does some actual hunting. Glory grows guilty of detested crimes, when for fame's sake, for praise, an outward part, we bend to that, the working of the heart. As I for praise alone now seek to spill the poor dear's blood, that my heart means no ill. I doubt if Navarre can even imagine that level of self-awareness. As for his claim that the edict shall strongly stand in force, their oath says any woman coming within a mile of his court will have her tongue cut out. Yet this doesn't happen to any of the 5 women in the play. The edict also says that any man caught taken with a wench will be imprisoned for 1 year. Yet when Costard confesses that he was caught with Jacquinetta, his punishment is fasting for a week on bran and water. And we're still in the first scene. At the end of the play, we find out that Don Armado was not only with the wench, he knocked her up. And there's no sense that he'll be punished. What's the point of the oath then? Also, the King of France is dying. He sent his daughter on an embassy to straighten out a mess over Aquitaine, and a loan Navarre's father had made to the French. Navarre not only forgets that she's coming, but he makes the vow anyway and forces her to camp out so he can keep an oath he seems to have no problem breaking everywhere else. And when he figures out the men are hopelessly in love with the French women, his solution is to dress up like Russians and visit them. Again, her father is dying. She's on a diplomatic mission. And when they find out that her father has died, Navarre's immediate reaction is to propose marriage. He's read so many books, he's forgotten how to read a room. Again, contrast this with the princess, her reaction on finding out that they won't be allowed into court. Tell him the daughter of the King of France, on serious business, craving quick dispatch, importunes personal conference with his grace. Haste signifies so much while we attend, like humble visaged suitors, I can never say that, his high will. Right? And here she is it there? I think so. Here she is upon finding out that her father has died. Right? They come in, find out her father's died right away. She says, turns to her servant, Boyette, prepare, I will away tonight. Madam, not so, I do beseech you stay. Prepare, I say. I thank you, gracious lords, for all your fair endeavors, and entreat out of a new sad soul that you vouchsafe in your rich wisdom to excuse or hide the liberal opposition of our spirits. If overboldly we have borne ourselves in the converse of breath, your gentleness was guilty of it. Farewell, worthy lord, a heavy heart bears not a humble tongue. Excuse me, so, coming too short of thanks for my great suit so easily obtained. This is telling for a couple of reasons. The highest ranking member in a Shakespeare play usually gets the last lines. They take charge at the end, right? This is the only play that I can think of where a female character has taken charge, right? She basically ignores Navarre and goes straight into a formal farewell to his court. And it appears Boyette was right. Thanks for my great suit so easily obtained. When it came to the negotiations over Aquitaine, Navarre apparently just rolled over and showed his belly. Leadership like that, he might as well take 3 years off and just read books. Okay. Is the convoluted language a feature or a bug? The language and that's kind of where, again, for me, I have trouble with Love's Labor's Lost because the language gets really thick. Right? It gets the wordplay is just pretty much constant, and it's hard to keep up with. So just wanted to go through this exchange real quick. The deer was, as you know, sanguis in blood, ripe as the palm water, who now hangeth like a jewel in the ear of Kylo, the sky, the welkin, the heaven, and anon falleth like a crab to the face of the earth, to the face of Terra, the soil, the land, the earth. Truly, Master Holofernes, the epithets are sweetly varied, like a scholar at the least. But, sir, I assure you it was a buck at the first head. Sir Nathaniel, hold credo. 'Twas not a hold credo, 'twas a pricket. Most barbarous intimation, yet a kind of insinuation, as it were, in via, in way of explication. Facere, as it were, replication, or rather ostentare, to show, as it were, his inclination, after his undressed, unpolished, uneducated, unpruned, untrained, or rather unlettered, or rather unconfirmed fashion, to insert again my hode credo for a deer. I said the deer was not a hode credo, 'twas a pricket. Twice sod simplicity bis coctus. O thou monster ignorance, how deformed dost thou look? Sir, he hath never fed of the dainties that are bred in a book. He hath not eat paper, as it were. He hath not drunk ink. His intellect is not replenished. He is only animal. Oh, sorry, I forgot. He is only an animal, only sensible in the duller parts. This is actually kind of a funny exchange, and I love how it ends on that Mark Strand note. Ink running from the corners of the mouth. But if you're sitting in the audience and you haven't brushed up on your Latin, I'm not sure you're going to get the joke. Holofernes uses the Latin phrase hode credo, I don't believe it, which Dole hears as old gray doe. Right? That's why he's arguing. He claims the princess had killed a pricket, a young male deer, Biscoctus just means twice cooked. It's an insult. Right? The exchange is fairly straightforward, but I think it demonstrates, shows, replicates. One challenge I see in this play, it puts a lot of pressure on the audience to keep up with the verbal gymnastics. It's one thing to have a single character talking like Polonius or E.B. Farnham, but things get tangled in a hurry when most of the cast is so verbally exuberant. And again, honestly, that was a pretty mild example. But let's compare it to the moment when the princess finds out her father is dead. God save you, madam. Welcome, Mercade, but that thou interruptest our merriment. I am sorry, madam, for the news I bring is heavy on my tongue. The king, your father, dead for my life. Even so, my tale is told. There's so much meaning in the silences of this exchange, so much depth. The world has shifted, not just politically, but for the princess in the most personal way possible. She lost her father. No epithet that is sweetly varied can approach the profundity of even so, my tale is told. So Shakespeare knew that. He had that in his pocket. And I hope he was holding it for this moment. I hope he knew, even at this early part of his career, that profundity calls for simplicity. And part of me is wondering if this was the dagger in Lily's euphuism, if this is the moment when he kills the dramatic father. Sometimes churchyard silence drowns out the carnival of chatter. Is this a comedy? Which is different from is it funny, right? Because funny's more time-bound and culture-bound. But is it a comedy? So Shakespeare used the new comedy formula, which we've had for a few thousand years. The new comedy formula comes from Plautus and Terence, classic dramatists, Roman dramatists, whom the Renaissance playwrights plundered. Comedy of Errors, one of Shakespeare's earliest comedies, is basically just a translation from Plautus. The new comedy formula should be familiar because we still use it today as our romantic comedy. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy and girl get back together, and then boy marries girl, right? It's like most of the plots from sitcoms. In Plautus, the hero and heroine are caught between an alternative of the sexual left, which offers a sterile world of indulgence, or of the social right, which offers a sterile world of puritanical rigor. Right? Could versus should. Though Shakespeare often combines or elides the types from play to play, they can be set out like there, like you guys see up there. The left is focused on the pleasures of the moment, right? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously? And the right just wants family and genes and wealth and titles to pass down through time immemorial. Your marital happiness is beside the point, right, for the right, which I understand makes us recoil in this 21st century world Hollywood has wrought. No one wants to be just a conduit for genes and heirlooms. And I recoil at the idea that my kids' happiness doesn't matter, but let's be honest. Do I care if my great-grandparents or anyone before them had happy marriages? Or let me put it this way. If I could go back in time and if I found out that my great-grandparents were trapped in a loveless marriage, would I help them separate and find their own paths to joy and self-fulfillment if in doing so, I would have to sacrifice my own existence? No. I want to live. Whatever the state of their relationship, right? On the other hand, there's that sugar rush of indulgence. You also want a partner who excites you between the pockets. So happy endings require balance. That's the problem new comedy sets out to solve, right? How do you basically please both sides of that equation? A new comedy ends with marriage and celebration in which the personal and social demands are met. A young couple that has the hots for each other, but also satisfies social expectations, which in Shakespeare means hot and shiny country club kids marry other hot and shiny country club kids, and grubby working class caddies marry grubby working class waitresses. Individuals are happy and social structures are unthreatened, and most importantly, wealth and titles stay intact, and there's at least the promise of a next generation. As C.L. Barber notes in his work on Shakespeare's festive comedy, it's not just about the ego, the couple's happiness. Marriage is about creating a sustainable community, a place for everyone and everyone in their place. Social regeneration in comedy is rooted in the promise of new life. Comedy is the promise of spring. That's why weddings are still so often in May and June. As Barbara points out, Shakespeare's tragedies and histories tend to be named after individuals, so Hamlet, King Lear, Henry V, while his comedies are named for groups of people, events, or common communal phrases. Merry Wives of Windsor, Midsummer Night's Dream, All's Well That Ends Well, right? Love's Labour's Lost. Comedy is formulaic. It's comfort food. Nothing pairs better with a bottle of wine and a good cry than a romantic comedy, unless, of course, it's another bottle of wine. There's a sense of comfort in knowing that everything's going to end up okay. And I'm just going to pull this up. I'm not really going to talk about it, but this is Toby Whitcomb's comedic formula. And a couple things that I just really pull out that for this play. Comedies depict romance and end in marriage or the promise of marriage. Comedies bring renewal to particular characters as well as to society. Love's Labour's Lost is a comedy, sure, though as far as I can see, no one is transformed, society isn't renewed, and aside from Don Armado and Jacquinetta, we don't get a marriage or the promise of marriage. What we get is more akin to a dare. And I'm the only one with a microphone, so I'll speak to all of us. I don't think he can do it. Navarre broke his original oath on the same day he made it. I don't think he's going to go a whole year in the Hermitage. And what's really frustrating is that there's evidence of a sequel. Right? In 1598, Thomas Mears talks about a handful of contemporary writers and goes all fanboy over Shakespeare. He lists out Two Gentlemen of Verona, Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost, Midsummer's Night's Dream, Merchant of Venice, all comedies that we have, and Love's Labour's Won, which we don't. In 1603, a stationer named Christopher Hunt also listed Love's Labour's Won as one of the quartos he was selling, but nothing since. It's very rare that a comedy gets a sequel, but it's not impossible. It could be that the play was later renamed and we just don't recognize it, or maybe it's just so bad that readers use it for kindling, or maybe it's just lost. We don't know. What we do know, the play we do have ends without the ending that the genre demands. Okay, so that's what bugs me. Which brings us to what is for me the crux of the play. Why does the Princess of France refuse Navarre's marriage proposal? Here's what she says. We have received your letters full of love, your favors, the ambassadors of love, and in our maiden council rated them at courtship, pleasant jest, and courtesy, as bombast and as a lining of the time. But more devout than this in our respects have we not been, and therefore met your loves in their own fashion, like a merriment. She didn't take him seriously. Why should she? When people get bored, people create drama. We tend to either bully others for no reason, or we fall in love with whoever's readily available. We've all been in 8th grade. Nothing breaks the routine like illicit behavior. So again, why would she think this is anything more than a game? On paper, he's a great catch, but let's be honest, he's about as reliable as an American treaty in the 19th century. In his actions, he shows again and again his pronouncements and promises are merely performative. And remember, the princess's first encounter with Navarre only occurred because he was willing to break an oath he had just sworn. Cesario says in 12th Night, we men may say more, swear more, but indeed our shows are more than will, for still we prove much in our vows, but little in our love. Besides, as the princess goes on to point out, her acquaintance with Navarre has been a time too short to make a world without end bargain in. And quick fun fact, Cesario in 12th Night is a male disguised as a female character named Viola. So you have a boy actor, just like one of those times, you have a boy actor playing a woman pretending to be a man, right? And I think I just got Shakespeare canceled in Baldwin City. Sorry about that, kids. He's online. They'll take away your books. They won't take away your phones. Just Google it. I read somewhere once, I can't find it now, but let's be honest, I didn't really look super hard. I read once that one major sign of a society coming apart is when irony and parody, satire and sarcasm become the dominant genres of discourse. Okay. In other words, fissures and fractures appear on the social sphere when we habitually hold up for ridicule the common understanding of the words we share. That explains a lot of the past 40 years, and I've been thinking about this as I've considered the constant and complicated wordplay in Love's Labors. If words, signifiers, become untethered from meaning, magic and religious rituals, both of which depend on specific signifiers with specific meanings, become null and void. It's hard to believe in the bedrock of linguistic truth when we're constantly undermining our ability to trust language. And what happens to a society when the words we share no longer have serious meaning? What happens when meaning itself becomes arbitrary, subject to the whims and the appetites of the powerful? Oaths of office and pledges of allegiance become merely performative. Classic virtues such as honor and integrity become signs of weakness. The law liquefies, taking the shape of whoever wields it. The bully, whether that be president or prelate, prosecutor or pedagogue, extends their authority to language itself, casts their will as the only arbiter of meaning. We end up ruled by men with stony hearts and fatty livers. Look at this excerpt from Taming of the Shrew, written about the same time as Love's Labor's Lost. Petruchio, his wife Kate, and their friend Hortensio are making their way to Kate's father's house for the wedding of her sister. Come on, in God's name, once more towards our fathers. Good Lord, how bright and goodly shines the moon. The moon, the sun, it is not moonlight now. I say it is the moon that shines so bright. I know it is the sun that shines so bright. Now by my mother's son, and that's myself, it shall be the moon or star or what I list, or ere I journey to your father's house. Go on and fetch our horses back again, evermore crossed, nothing but crossed. Say what he says, or we shall never go. Forward, I pray, since we have come so far, and be it moon or sun or what you please, and if you please to call it a rush candle, henceforth I vow it shall be so for me. I say it is the moon. I know it is the moon. Nay, then, you lie. It is the blessed sun. Then God be blessed. It is the blessed sun. But sun, it is not when you say it is not. And moon changes even as your mind. What you will have it named, even that it is. And so shall be for Catherine. The trio next meet the father of Kate's sisters intended. Also on his way to the wedding, Petruchio insists that she's a pretty young woman, and that he's a pretty young woman, and instructs Kate to praise her as such. She does. Why, how now, Kate? I hope thou art not mad. This is a man, old, wrinkled, faded, withered, and not a maiden, as thou sayest. Pardon, old father, my mistaking eyes that have been so bedazzled with the sun, that everything I look on seemeth green. Now I perceive thou art a reverend father. Petruchio extends his marital authority over language itself, insisting he has the right to arbitrarily reassign meaning to commonly held signifiers. We say that often with authoritarian characters, and we can't definitively say this is something Shakespeare is contemplating as he put together Love's Labor's Lost. The concern over the integrity of language is definitely in the water of late medieval and Renaissance periods. Dante's Inferno, written roughly 300 years before Shakespeare, centers on a tour of hell where the damned are punished according to the severity of their sins. Dante, counterintuitively for modern Americans, punished least those who are carried away by desire, lust, gluttony, etc. Those punished heaviest, those closest to Satan himself, are the sinners who abused language. There are 9 circles in Dante's hell, and in the 8th circle are those who committed fraud. Panderers and seducers, flatterers and speculators, unscrupulous businessmen, extortionists and hypocrites, the counselors of fraud, the sowers of discord, and the counterfeits and falsifiers, people who misused signifiers. 5 minutes? Really? Okay. Who abused language to misrepresent truth. And in the 9th circle, the worst punishments are reserved for those who committed compound fraud, the treacherous, the oath breakers, the traitors against country and kin, against guests and lords. Judas, Brutus, you know the type, those who betray the positions and the offices they're entrusted with, those who betrayed themselves and their own vows, those who betrayed the people who depended upon them. There's a great deal of wisdom in Dante's scheme. Your cousin sleeps with your girlfriend, your neighbor steals your lawnmower. These are individual transgressions that don't affect social structures. You're just lost trust in specific people. That's why they're not punished as severely. But when we habitually misuse language, When we fail at the most elementary levels of linguistic integrity, we undermine communication itself. It makes it harder to trust anyone or anything. Coin is the currency of trade, but language is the currency of life, of society itself. And a society can no more survive widespread doubts about the veracity of its words than an economy can survive widespread doubts about the value of its coinage. Which brings us back to the question, as I see central to the play: how do you establish, much less maintain, a level of trust in a society when the words we share are so easily slipped of their commonly shared meanings? The Princess of France says upon Navarre's wedding proposal, "We thought you were just playing around. We didn't take you seriously." In other words, we can't believe what you say because we see what you do. You use words so loosely, we just enjoy the performance and don't even bother looking for truth in them. Sorry, let me get up a little bit. Let's go back. Love's Labor's Lost, then, seems to me less a love story than an exploration of language and trust. When we've lost our faith in language, when speech is merely performative, when discourse, social, political, commercial, is just a series of empty signifiers designed to elicit momentary emotional response, our world becomes meaningless, merely sound and fury signifying nothing. Which leaves us in the same bind as the characters find themselves at the end of the play. How do you reestablish trust once trust has been squandered? I don't know. I really don't. I just know it's going to be hard and it'll take a long time. I grew up with cousins, big and mean and tough and ugly. So I learned early on, if you need to go through something rough, it's best just to put your head down and plow through it. If anyone asked, I'd say we have to make a collective decision to insist that words have meaning and lying has consequences. Quit accepting untruth as a matter of course. Stop rewarding those entities who lie to us, whether they be people in our lives or in Washington, corporations, or churches. Would Shakespeare agree with me? I don't know, but he wrote a princess, whom I'm pretty sure would. The women in the play suggest the path to the men. Shut the F up, reconnect with the spirit through deprivation, reconnect with society through service. But will that work? They'll know in a year. The play I assume Shakespeare wrote, that I assume addresses this question, Love's Labor's Won, is lost to us if it existed at all. Maybe, like the letter to his wife, someday it'll be found. Meanwhile, we must muddle on best we can and hope for better days. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. We have time for maybe a couple questions. And I'd ask we use the microphone if you have one.
So, if this is in your mind, if this is going to be about, you see the performance is about who's able to perform this complicated language effectively.
Yeah.
Who would you cast?
Oh, shit. That's a good question. I mean, there's some actors, I guess, mostly British, that I think could handle it. And honestly, I don't know if it's as much, I guess if it's like a televised or like a movie or something, I don't know if it's much, for me, I don't know if it's much as who I would cast as whether I would make like the subtitles permanent. Because that's like the whole credo thing. It's like, I don't know how you show an audience that you've switched over to Latin for the joke to become intelligible, right? Because again, that's the one that the guy kept thinking they were saying old gray doe. So but I mean, you know, like Ray Fiennes, I mean, just kind of the usuals. I'd probably cast him. And it has one thing that Barber says that's really interesting, or that I found really interesting anyway. And he was real quick. He was writing like in the 1950s, right? So it's kind of a different era of scholarship and stuff. But he was saying that he reads Love's Labor's Lost as a dance, and that the repetition, the antithesis, all that kind of stuff is basically a verbal dance between, and the way that we will repeat dance moves, right? And particularly like the formalized dancing, during the Renaissance, and that he sees it as a kind of this verbal dance between. But it's really, as far as I know, during Shakespeare's lifetime, like for instance, it was only performed for nobles, right? So people who are probably more in tuned with that kind of language use and stuff, and that kind of level of play. As far as a popular audience, again, I don't see it, which is one reason why I'm excited for this summer, because I'm really interested to see if they can pull it off. And I'm guessing they can, but it's just, yeah, it's really hard for me to see.
Steve, why are they even doing this one, do you think?
I don't know. That's why I said it's so bizarre how it's like, well, Titus Andronicus is the same way, honestly. There's not much history of performance until the 20th century, and then it kind of became like an it play. I think from an actor's point of view, director's point of view, it's like it's a break from the Hamlets and the Romeo and Juliets and all the other ones that we tend to see. I can see it as a challenge, which would be exciting for the actors and stuff if they can pull it off. And that, like I said, though, I have a really hard time, and apparently for 200 years, a lot of people had a hard time seeing exactly how this is going to work on stage. And that Times, and I mean, this is 1839, but that Times review is basically like, it's a mess. Right? It's just a big mess of a play. But it's, like I said, I take a lot from Merry Wives, which is another play I tended to dismiss, And like I said, there's a legend that he wrote Merry Wives of Windsor because the Queen asked him to. She wanted to see a character, Falstaff, in a different kind of genre. And so to me, it feels like an assignment that a student doesn't want to do, right? But so I was amazed by how well they pulled it off, right? I mean, it's Central Park, right? It's public theater, but it was I thought it was just a brilliantly funny play when in performance on stage. So again, it might be that page stage thing, right? It's like, I don't see it necessarily, but don't trust me, on that. I trust the actors, kind of let them see what they can do with it and stuff and bring that up. But yeah. Yeah.
So I'm hearing the criticisms that make sense to me as you're presenting these, but I'm wondering if you warmed up at all to this play more than you thought, because you seem, as you're presenting this, to find a lot of honor and respect for the princess, who is clearly the most sympathetic and the most in charge. And I'm wondering if that is beginning to rise up in your reading of this so that you don't hate the play as much as you once did.
I can love the princess but hate the play. But no, I think you're right. I think and that's where, again, I said I'm grateful because it forced me to really to read the play, multiple times, to kind of go over it, to talk about it ad nauseum. Brenda can tell you about that. And to really kind of like work hard to find an end. I mean, if you guys want to do Hamlet or something like that, I can do that in my sleep, drunk. So, while in a hospital. So So this was a fun challenge, I think, for me too. And I think you're right. I mean, the princess, I was really amazed. The more I looked at the script, the more I looked at the book, and kind of going through things. It's like she's grounded, right? She has, it's like, you want to get married to her, tuck in a shirt, get a job, right? She doesn't want your Russian dances and crap. We want, so I really love her. I think I recognize her in a lot of ways. But yeah, so there is that, and it's it's what I try to tell students, like no play's perfect. I mean, I'm going to find problems with any of Shakespeare's plays. And no play's just trash either. And the same as productions. I've been to a lot of productions of Shakespeare, so I'm like, oh, that really sucked. But there's always like something good in it, or a few things that were good in it, right? But this worked, or the idea was really interesting, right? They just weren't able to pull it off. So yeah, kind of a lot. So yeah, I went in like big moan, big groan. But it's I've came to terms with it after a while. So
All right. Thank you, Steve.
all right, thank you guys.